Okay, I think we're ready to get started here. So first of all, thank you everyone for attending. My name is Matt Lucas. I'm a field CTO here with Stardog. And today our webinar topic is enabling a data-driven tariff strategy with real-time visibility, traceability, and agility. Really a lot of words there, but what we're going to focus on is how can we help your organization navigate a lot of the challenges that we see in the geopolitical world today, and how can we help your organization address these concerns, save money in the process, and take advantage of our platform by doing that. Okay. Manufacturers today are really grappling with a new wave of tariff and trade policies. They directly impact supply chain costs and continuity. Global sourcing, it's a moving target. It's always changing. And suddenly, a component from overseas might cost 25% more or even more than that. So that's going to squeeze your margins, force manufacturers to really look for new suppliers, really raising additional questions. So what type of materials or parts have these new tariffs? How do we as an organization absorb those costs, find alternate sources, and how do we prevent delays with getting those parts into our organization, perhaps at customs and in the shipping process? Ensuring this supply chain efficiency and profitability is really a top executive concern, something that we see frequently in the field. In particular, manufacturers and enterprises with global supply chains face these challenges with cost management, sourcing alternatives, and really planning strategically to make the right decisions. The only way to succeed in this environment is to make decisions strategically and really focusing on how that tariff data and how the trade regulations are going to impact your company specifically. Visibility is critical. Supply chain managers need alerts to understand what components are sourced from a certain location and now incur that additional duty or tariff. And you need to be able to respond very agile in real time, sourcing those alternative suppliers in those lower tariff locations or other suppliers where you can realize some of those cost savings. Manufacturers need to really be able to manage, map, model, see, and respond. Understand the complexities of the HTS schedule, something that we at Stardog are really going to help make simpler to navigate with our technology. Map the exposure of those tariff impacted regions to products. How do we model an alternative sources and manufacturing scenarios so that we can address some of these changes efficiently? How can we see our supply chain end to end? Put a lens over this so that we can identify efficiencies, areas we can make improvements. And ultimately, how do we respond strategically, make decisions with agility, and really adapting to those policy shifts as they happen? Stardog empowers a strategic data-driven response to tariffs. We do this through our unified data fabric and analytics platform. First, we take information such as tariff data, trade regulations, and other information, and we put that into our enterprise knowledge graph along with your supply chain data. Really means all of your products, all of your parts, all your suppliers, along with tariff rates, duties, rules, are in one platform and can really help empower that decision process. The platform can identify things such as what SKUs or bill of materials will see cost increases from new tariffs. We enable companies to recalculate some of those landed costs in real time, using your data and understanding where perhaps we want to source additional products or similar products from other locations to get that benefit. What's really beneficial is this analysis is done in real time on up-to-date complete information, something very hard to do with even ERP systems, understanding that there are silos, data silos, and information really lives throughout the ecosystem. Additionally, Stardog, our capabilities provides a lens into this information through our inference capability and analytics power, helping you understand and anticipate those downstream effects. For instance, a system may simulate how a tariff could cause delays at a certain port or location using historical logistics data or predicting demand changes, perhaps on the inventory and how fast we're selling a particular product as those goods rise. These capabilities allow manufacturers to adjust their sourcing and pricing strategies rapidly and on the fly so that those impacts can be absorbed and mitigated before they become a bigger problem to your business. Okay, so today what we want to do is walk through a demonstration, and we have 3 specific business value cases that we want to talk through. The first one is really focused around faster decision cycles. So how can an organization such as yours answer critical questions in minutes without hallucinations and leveraging the power of your data? In particular, integrated data and AI-driven analysis, it can automate complex analysis that happens offline and with data science today. Um, Typically, this type of work requires cross-department coordination, a lot of manual data crunching, manipulation, pulling together information, and ultimately the speed of getting that information. It's very critical, and that's been a challenge for many organizations. So how can we use the power of Stardog to turn that analysis into minutes? Taking advantage of your data, providing your supply chain and executive teams on the ground the information they need to make those decisions very quickly. All right, so we're going to shift into our demo for our first scenario. And what we want to understand first is how do we potentially understand the impact of tariff increases on parts from a given location? And in this scenario, we're going to look at parts that are sourced from Canada. And we're going to go through a process of a scenario analysis to understand the potential impact of those parts being sourced from that location and how we can react and perhaps identify some efficiencies in that process. Okay. So what I'm going to do is shift over to our Stardog VoiceBox platform. This is where we're going to ask a lot of these questions today. And the first question I may ask in this scenario is really just understanding what products are affected by tariff increases. And we'll look at specifically electronic parts from Canada. And using VoiceBox, I'm allowed to click on some of these, what we call spotlight questions, these common questions that are asked in the industry to get some very quick and rapid answers and insights from that data. So as we go through the process here, Stardog VoiceBox, oh, there we go. Wouldn't be a demo without a false start. So let's go ahead and try this again. We'll open up VoiceBox and we'll go ahead and ask the same question. So first, we're going to understand what products would be affected by a tariff increase on those electronic parts in Canada. And we see our response here is that we have 21 products that are impacted by that specific increase. In particular, Truck 47, which is a particular automobile from our manufacturer, and this is a hypothetical auto manufacturer scenario, so that's what we're operating as today. We see that's one particular product that could be potentially impacted by this. As you take a look at this, we also bring in additional information tied to Truck 47, such as the bill of materials that's required to produce that particular product. We have part information, we have supplier details, and other information that's relevant. Okay, so if I actually click on Truck 47, we can get some information about this one particular product. And we see that this is, in this case, a Nissan cargo van. Looks like it's a 2025 produced model. And all these attributes that you see in our knowledge panel and VoiceBox, these are all configurable in your environment. So if you're working, for instance, with tractors, or if you're working with microchips, your attributes may be different than what you see today in the demonstration, but that's all configurable to your environment. Okay. Additionally, as you take a look at VoiceBox, we have the ability to look at where the information comes from. So all of this is driven behind the scenes by our knowledge graph platform. And just very briefly to show how we're driving this scenario today, I'm going to show just a very brief model. And this is not something we'll talk at length, but this is essentially a map of the business organization, really taking advantage of your business details in what we call a semantic layer, tied to the business terminology and business relationships between things such as your tariffs that are impacting your parts and your materials, the products that are taking advantage of given parts, the brands and the bill of materials that are needed to produce a product. All this information is related. And what's beautiful about Stardog is we're able to take advantage of your data where it sits. So just briefly showing our designer product, with designer, we're able to pull in that information from leading manufacturers such as Databricks and Snowflake. In the case of tariff codes, we've actually made this very easy for organizations by bringing in a lot of the HTS catalog into this demonstration. And this is something that we can absolutely provide your organization as well. And we also work with typical databases such as Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, things of that nature. Okay. So let's go back to our demonstration here. So we understood that by asking a question about a tariff increase on electronic parts, we have a number of parts that are impacted by this. So as we go through the demo, let's ask a little bit more complex question. Perhaps let's understand the total cost per product contributed by that electronics part scenario from Canada. And let's also add in some additional information about tariff increases and understand the impact. So what we're looking at here is that we see if there is an increase on tariffs on specifically Canadian electric parts, there is going to be a specific impact on several products. And we can start to see what that impact is. And we can even align that to the tariff codes that are in place. We can understand the unit price of the parts that go into producing those products. We can understand and see in real time, the actual rate of duty that's being applied. And we can even see the resulting impact of that tariff tied to the product and however many parts are used to produce that product. Okay. In addition to this, one of the things that we like to highlight about VoiceBox is the ability to have traceable insights. So unlike typical generative AI solutions, we're not training models to respond on your data. We're responding directly to your data. So this question is fairly complex. We're asking several things here. And what we're able to do is turn that text question into what's called a Sparkle query. This is the query language of our knowledge graph. And we don't need to go through particulars of this today, but understand that connecting all these data sources together, it requires quite a bit. And what Stardog VoiceBox brings to the table is the ability to generate these advanced and very specific queries and apply those directly to your data to get immediate insights into these complex questions. Okay. Now, let's take a further look at Truck 47. So we did take a brief look at the data and the elements. One of the things we can also do is we can visualize this and see what else is related to Truck 47. So if I click on our Open in Explorer button, we can get a very quick graphical view into that particular truck. And we can see that this is a truck sold in Mexico. It is a product of ours. It's tied to a specific bill of materials. And then we can even look at some additional details in Explorer as well. A little bit more advanced and visual way of exploring your data, but something that we also provide out of the box with our Stardog platform. Okay, let's dive into this scenario a bit more. So now that we understood what's the total cost per product contributed by that Canadian electronic parts scenario, and we now understand the tariff impact, let's run a scenario. What happens if all of a sudden the tariffs have changed? It's now a 20% impact instead of the impact by part, and we'll call that a broad change to the duty across the ecosystem. So in VoiceBox, we'll go ahead and launch one of our suggested prompts here. And in this case, we're going to pull in that scenario where we apply the 20% scenario, and we're going to see what the impact is to our product line in that case. So as VoiceBox goes and calculates that information, we now see that Truck 47, in our case, is going to cost $3,398.46, as opposed to $2,840.11. So just with a couple quick clicks and some simple questions, we now understand the scenario where that tariff impact is going to impact the cost of that product, specifically because we are using parts in a location where that tariff is being raised. So now we're starting to bring insights and bringing that information to your executives to make some business decisions off of that scenario. Okay. So that's the first case, kind of walking through the faster decision cycles. And we have several others that we'll walk through. Just kind of looking at the webinar chat and communications, I do see we have a question around Amazon codes. So the beauty of Stardog is that we are a configurable engine. So you notice when I first started, we showed the model and how that aligns to the business org. Let's say, for instance, we want to include some additional information such as Amazon codes or manufacturer codes, UPCs. You have the ability to add this data in as long as you have access to that data source. So it's definitely something that we can address if that comes up. Okay, very good. So let's go back to our presentation here and let's explore business case 2. Now, business case 2 is going to work around cost avoidance and margin protection. We actually have a couple scenarios that we'll walk through today on the webinar tied to this specific case. So in this example, let's understand perhaps how do we identify an alternative source for a part in a non-tariff region or shift the production of a particular product or part domestically? What's the impact of that? Perhaps we can offset as much as 25% on that import duty. And if you think about the volume of which major manufacturers operate, this could lead to millions of dollars in savings just by making some small business decisions that we bring to the table using the Stardog platform. So in some of these cases, we may even understand that even if tariffs are being paid, yes, it may impact our margins. It may impact some of our profitability, but we may see that there are not any good, clear alternatives available as well. So understanding those decision points, it's going to really influence our executives and how they make those decisions moving forward. Okay, so let's go back into our demo here. And we're going to start with our second scenario. So the first thing we want to look at in this case is really looking at a particular part in our auto manufacturing scenario. We'll say batteries. And what we want to understand first is, where are we getting our batteries from broadly? Because we need different types of batteries, we have different inventory amounts of these batteries in different locations. And we want to start to understand a little bit about this ecosystem. So our first question really is, where are batteries sourced from, and what is the current inventory we have for our organization? So with VoiceBox, we ask the question, and we do get a nice text response here, but on the left, we have a really nice table view of this information. So we see that we have several countries that we are sourcing different battery parts from. We have different inventory amounts that are being stockpiled for production use, and we have a good oversight into that. Perhaps we want to look at this as a chart. So with VoiceBox, we have the ability to go ahead and put this into a chart view so that we can see where this information is a bit more graphical. Perhaps we want to put this into a spreadsheet or just look at it more visually. And by doing that, if I take a look at the chart, I notice that we have a couple of scenarios here that Canada and Mexico in particular have quite a bit of inventory. There's a lot of inventory that we stockpile within those two countries. And perhaps we want to take a deeper look at one of those scenarios. In this case, why don't we take a look at Mexico and understand a little bit about the unit price for the batteries that we're sourcing from Mexico. So we'll go ahead and ask that question. What are the unit price for batteries in Mexico? Again, VoiceBox going into your data, pulling out some insights for that. And we see in the case of Mexico, we have 6 particular batteries that we are sourcing, and they have various different unit prices. Now that we understand just broadly that, yes, we have exposure in Mexico, yes, we have some batteries that we're gathering from those suppliers in Mexico, we may want to look at some alternate parts so that we understand if there are challenges, perhaps getting that battery from Mexico, or maybe there are some additional tariffs going in place, how do we address that? So we'll go ahead and ask a follow-up question here tied to that scenario. If there are alternative parts, what is the price and where are they sourced from? So we'll go ahead and let VoiceBox run through that scenario case, and we'll understand where we may have some opportunity to save some money. Okay. So it looks like in our battery scenario, we have 12 batteries that have some alternates. And with VoiceBox, we actually have the ability to look at the part that we have, in this case, the battery. We are offering an alternate part, and we also are providing some information about the suppliers. And if we look at the suppliers here, let's take a look at one in particular. I'm interested in this Japanese part. And we'll go ahead and click on supplier 9256 here. Now, these are I would say not very clean supplier names. In your environment, if you do have a supplier inventory with names and location and other information, those are things, again, that we can configure. So in our demonstration here, we see that this particular supplier is an approved supplier. It looks like they've been an approved supplier for approximately 5 years now. They are headquartered in Kyoto, Japan, and we have some other information that help make a determination, is this a supplier we want to work with going forward? Okay. Now, understanding that this part and this supplier looks like a good alternative for one of our battery components, let's perhaps understand a little bit more about that. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a follow-up question here in VoiceBox. And we're going to ask specifically, what are the alternate parts for a given part, 3096? That's the part that's being sourced by this Japanese manufacturer. And what are the part costs, including tariffs, that they're being sourced from? So let's really dive into this scenario a little bit more and understand those alternatives a bit better. Okay, so if we take a look here, we see that the first column has the original part, and we also see that we have an alternate. We see that there are tariffs being applied, and we can even look at the tariff directly. So if I click on 9090 here, again, these are live HTS code numbers, so this is real data. We see that there's a specific general rate percentage included. We have some other information. We have an HTS description that we've sourced in. So we have clear information about the tariff itself. We understand the core unit cost. We understand the tariff percentage and supplier information. So if we look at this in totality, we see that just on the surface, this third part, this one here from Japan, it looks like the total cost, including the tariff fees, that is probably the lowest cost alternative that we can source. Now that we understand that that's a good alternative, let's go ahead and understand a little bit more about what our product impact is. So as we go through this exercise, we understand that we now are identifying suppliers, locations, we've understood and identified alternative parts, and now perhaps we want to understand how do these alternative parts align or tie into the products that we use in our ecosystem. So we'll go ahead and ask that question. And in particular, the part 3096, we see is tied to 6 specific products. So now we can start to really look at the product impact, and we've essentially connected the dots from the batteries to the inventory to the location, all the way down to the scope and specific product lines that are going to be impacted if we decided to make a change of that. Okay. So again, one scenario in understanding the cost and the impact tied to tariffs and locations, and we've identified some good alternate parts that we can pursue. Okay. Our second scenario in this case, we want to look at the bill of materials. Now, one of the challenging things that businesses need to do is, as we're producing complicated machinery, complicated products, the parts and components that go into that are critical, and they're often ever changing. So the first scenario looks specifically at one type of a part. Now we're going to look at this from a product perspective. And in particular, we're going to ask first about the bill of materials for one particular product. In this case, Van 18. This is one type of our products that we as an auto manufacturer sell, and we want to understand what the current bill of materials is for this product. Now, with VoiceBox, oftentimes we'll provide a quick summary of the most used or most frequently used parts or components, which we've done in the text response. But in our table to the left, we see that there are several different types of parts and different units that are used to basically produce this one particular product. Now, we understand the basic foundation of the bill of materials. We know what needs to go into that product to create it. Let's start to understand if we want to make some adjustments. Now, in our scenario here, what happens if it's very difficult to source or get parts from a particular location in the world? In our scenario, we're going to look at Mexico again. And in this case, what would happen to this bill of materials if we decided to replace our parts sourced in Mexico with alternates in a different location? So we'll go ahead and ask that for this specific bill, and we'll see what VoiceBox lets us know about that scenario. So as this goes through, VoiceBox again is converting that text into a query, querying your data, bringing back the information across your entire data landscape, pulled into that model, and giving a text response. The end user doesn't need to know that. They just need to know they're getting insights very quickly. And in this case, it looks like we have one particular part that's going to be impacted. Now, within that part, there are 14 of those parts needed to produce this product. So obviously, there is a minimal impact from a number of parts perspective, but there are a lot of these units that go into producing that particular product. Okay, so why don't we look at this from a different lens? So perhaps I want to start to understand financial impact. So a reasonable follow-up to this would be asking, what's the contribution for that specific part into the total cost of manufacturing this particular Van 18? So we'll go ahead and ask that question. And in this case, the contribution for that specific part is $3,979.04. So pretty significant expense for that particular product because we are using 14 of these units and the unit price is $245.67. We apply the tariff in that case. It looks like a 15% duty. Ultimately, that results in the summary that we have. Okay. Now, this is the current part, and this is our current cost. Let's go ahead and ask about an alternative. How can we perhaps save some money in this case, right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to ask a question around this scenario. In this case, we're going to ask, what would the total cost be for 14 units of this part? And this is an alternative part that we've identified to incorporate into the product, and how much money could we save in that scenario? So it looks like if we incorporated 14 parts of this part 1884, which is an alternative for the 2503 part that we just looked at, we are going to potentially save some money. And it looks like the cost is for this particular implementation on the bill of materials is going to go down about $150 because we see that the total cost is going to reduce from $3,979 down to approximately $3,825. So just by asking VoiceBox, what are my alternatives? What are those options I have? I now see that for every product that I produce with that bill of materials, I'm going to save $150 per product that we produce. Real savings to your organization from your data very quickly. Okay, so I'll pause there, come back to some questions. It looks like no additional questions so far, and I do encourage everyone as we go through the exercise here, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and in the webinar chat. I'm happy to pause as we go through here and address those questions as we go. Great timing. So it looks like Vishal Singh has a question for everyone here. How much granularity can this handle as the bill of materials often has second-tier vendors from other countries? It's a great question. So variability is something that we often see with the bill of materials. Sometimes perhaps we have scheduled bill changes. So maybe a bill is applicable today, but we're starting to plan for the next quarter when perhaps maybe one of our manufacturers is no longer offering a specific part we need, and we need to introduce a new part. So the granularity really depends on what your business outcome is. And one of the beauties of our platform is that, this demo that I'm showing today is fairly high level, fairly basic. But if you're sourcing from various systems, various suppliers, and you have significantly large bill of materials, our platform is enterprise scale. It's built to scale to trillions of records. And we have proven enterprise scalability with many of our clients in this case. So granularity and aligning that with business value is something that we always look to optimize. But I'm confident that both from a volume perspective, as well as addressing those concerns, is something that Stardog can address. So great question, Vishal. Thank you for that. Okay. So getting close on time here. So we'll go ahead to our last scenario, and this is our third case. And we're going to look at operational continuity and resilience. So looking at an organization, how do we reduce the impact of supply chain disruption and explore alternative cases when these scenarios happen? So by proactively adjusting sourcing and inventory, companies can avoid some of the chaos that a sudden cost spike or an import delay can cause to your organization. You can maintain a high service level, keeping those orders on time as these costs fluctuate with insights in this area. Transparency, very critical, also fosters better collaboration with your suppliers on navigating these cases. So perhaps you identify that a new tariff may impact the supplier that you worked with for a long time. That could open up an opportunity to negotiate some of that cost sharing or understanding and finding beneficial solutions that benefit both that trusted supplier and your organization. So really getting ahead of those challenges. Overall, the benefit is a more resilient supply chain for your organization. You're able to absorb those policy shocks and keep moving forward with minimal loss in efficiency and transparency. Okay, so let's look at a scenario here for this particular case. Now, as we look at this case, let's go ahead and start a new VoiceBox initiative here. We're going to look at, in particular, Japan. And we want to understand what inventory do we have sourced from Japan, and we want to understand the inventory and demand. We're just looking at this from a demand perspective right now, but perhaps we want to dive into this and understand what impacts to our operating resilience can happen if perhaps a new tariff is raised in Japan, or perhaps there's sourcing challenges and the ability to get product from that location is impacted. So the first question we're going to ask is, let's look at our inventory. What do we currently source from Japan? What's our current inventory counts? And let's understand a little bit about that to start this scenario. So when we ask this question, we see that we have currently for our business, we have 21 parts that we source from Japan. We list a couple of those as a bulleted list, but again, looking at our table, we see that here's the part number, the part types that we're sourcing. We have specific information about the suppliers, and we're also looking at some specific information tied to the inventory and our demand forecast. So now we're starting to look at this not just from a cost savings perspective, but can we keep producing the product if it's being sourced from a location, if there are disruptions? And just on the surface, we see that generally it looks like we have good inventory tied to our demand forecast, but there's some that are fairly close. And perhaps there may be some concerns here that we want to address. So one way to do this would be to export this down into a spreadsheet, which we have the ability to do. We can look at the table, go line by line, or we can leverage VoiceBox and our analyze capabilities to ask about what parts perhaps need to be ordered because of that demand scenario. So by using this function, what we're doing is we're leveraging our capability to look at that data, provide an analysis, a summary, and provide back some information to us. So in this case, VoiceBox has responded, says that based on the provided data, the parts that need to be ordered that demand a greater forecast, the forecast is greater than the inventory that we have several parts that are impacted. It looks like we have an electronics component, a door component, a steering component, exhaust system, and an exhaust system. These are currently higher in demand than the inventory that we have. So we need to take some action to ensure that we keep those particular parts in stock and allow our supply chain to remain unimpacted. Again, simple question. We ask some analysis. We have some actionable insights very quickly. So if we dive into the scenario a bit more, let's take a deeper look at parts within that scenario and understand, perhaps what parts would be impacted if there was a tariff increase on exhaust system parts from Japan. Now, as you see, VoiceBox is like any technology system. It's not perfect. Sometimes we need to re-ask the question. And in this case, VoiceBox always looks at the context of the questions that you ask. So sometimes VoiceBox cannot find an answer. In some cases, you're asking a question that your data cannot answer. And what LLMs often will do is they will do their best to guess and try to provide the information. Well, we designed VoiceBox to not do that. We don't believe hallucinations are valuable to businesses. So when we can't find an answer and we're not confident that that's correct, we are going to tell you we can't find that answer. Now, in some cases, VoiceBox is going to look at the previous context and may have some difficulty because of that previous context. And in this case, that's what's happening here. So we'll just go ahead and retry the question. And you'll notice that a flag was put into the question called no history. This essentially says, let's start the question without the previous context, and let's see if we can get the insights by going back. And in this case, it looks like we were able to do that. So again, for the question we asked, which parts would be affected if there is a tariff increase on exhaust system parts from Japan? It looks like we have 3 parts that would be impacted here. Okay. Now that we understand that there is an impact, let's go through the similar exercise of understanding the cost impact here. So we'll go ahead and ask a follow-up question. And in this case, what is the part cost, including tariffs, for one of these parts? In the case of 6224, that was the last part that was offered there. It looks like the unit cost for this particular part is $403.90. There is a tariff that's being applied to this with a 6.5 rate. And it looks like because of that tariff, the total cost for that part is $430.15. Now, that's interesting. We understand there's a tariff applied. That's great. We understand the total cost. Let's run another scenario. What happens if, for whatever reason, Japan institutes a broad tariff of a 20% increase? And we want to analyze the impact of that potential increase across our ecosystem. So we'll go ahead back to our analyze capability in VoiceBox. And what is our total new cost if the general rate for that part increases to 20%? And VoiceBox does some calculations for us. It looks like based on the data that is in your organization, in our model, in VoiceBox, the current rate is 6.5%. We know our unit cost. We know the current cost with the current tariff. If this increases to 20%, we actually show the calculation VoiceBox applied here very quickly. And we see now that the new cost for that part is $484.68. So again, asking VoiceBox not only to just bring back the data, but perform some analysis against that data. And let's start understanding some scenarios and how we can make our organization more resilient. Let's take this a step further. What if that particular product, we source in 100,000 units? So the math here is fairly easy, but 100,000 units, obviously at that cost, we now see that the tariff, after the tariff increase, we're going to have a significant impact here. It looks like $43 million perhaps is going to be our total cost. So there is a big cost impact, and we may now want to start to look at some alternate parts and understand where we can find some alternate options that perhaps have a lower cost to us. So one more question here we'll follow up with. What are alternate parts for this particular part? What are their part costs? What are the tariffs? And where are they sourced from? So we're really pulling all of this together. And we understand now that we have three specific parts that look like they could really help us out. In particular, they all have tariffs, which is interesting. They all have rates of duty. But as we look at the data, we see that there is one part from Mexico that stands out as the lowest cost option. If that's the most cognizant and most important thing for our organization, we can take some action against that particular part. And if we, again, want to take a look at this in a nice, clean view, we can put this into a chart. And then as we go through that, we may have just a follow-up question, just a general question about, our exercise today. So we explored Japan, we explored, the tariffs and the scenarios. Maybe I want to understand just broadly, what's Japan's stance on tariffs? Like, what do we think is happening? And what we can do with VoiceBox is we can ask general LLM questions, and we can configure this to your internal AI agents as well. So if you have an LLM structured for general information that's perhaps onboard and ready for use, we can configure that to use with VoiceBox in parallel with our capability to query your graph and your data. And by asking this question, you notice that we do highlight this is unverified. This is a general LLM response, so we don't have the grounding of all the other questions we went through today. But we see as of 21, it looks like VoiceBox is saying Japan generally doesn't oppose tariffs or high volume tariffs on US-made automobiles. And there's some other information here. Again, we can't verify this is completely accurate because we're trusting the LLM. But if you want to combine general questions and perhaps some of your agents along with VoiceBox, we allow that capability to happen. Okay. So to close, in this case, we looked at our inventory in Japan, we identified those concerns, we made some determinations, all without hallucinations in real time against your data. A very powerful capability, allowing your organization to make really quick decisions. Now, before I get into closing, I do see that we have several questions here. So let me go ahead and take a look at these. So Stefan asked 3 questions. So how complex is the overall model and ontology? How many classes and properties does it include? How well does the NL Sparkle query generation work with large models, say 200 classes, 2,000 properties? So, the model we showed earlier today, earlier on the demo, Stefan, let me go ahead and bring this up here. This is a fairly straightforward model. And one of the things we like to show in these demonstrations is that you do not need a huge complex model to take advantage of what we've done. We actually prefer that clients start small, get value, and iterate. And I think that's a very good approach. But for an organization that has an ontology, that has an RDF setup, knowledge graph ready to use, we are working with some of the largest organizations in the world that have hundreds, if not thousands of classes in their models. Many models working together, and we're able to still bring value on top of VoiceBox. So I appreciate the question. And perhaps, Stefan, this is a follow-up that we can look at your business case and see if this is an opportunity to work with a complex model, if that's something that you have. A couple follow-ups that I see are on the chat here. What about the special operators, the no history, analyze, chart that we went through today? So I covered several of them. We do have additional ones, and this is all in our documentation online on our docs.stardog.com. Just ones that we showed today. No history removes context, analyze, asks an LLM to look at the data and provide a summary analysis of that information. LLM sends the information to the LLM for a general response. And we also have the chart capabilities where we can look at things in bar charts, pie charts, and we do have others on the roadmap that we're looking at as well. And the last question I see on the Q&A, do general LLM questions also support web search and reasoning, across other common LLM tools? I think for that question, Stefan, might need a little bit more information, but our ability to integrate the LLM feature is really us sending that information to an LLM, asking it to opine and bring back information. So perhaps we could look at that question a bit more as a follow-up with you. Okay, so in closing, we do have some time for some more questions, and I'll pause at the end here for that. Tariffs are causing challenges with all companies. I think we all see the news. We see how rapidly things are changing, and it's really critical that businesses can adapt quickly, adapt fast. And one of the capabilities that Stardog brings is the ability to do that rapid adjustment, understanding the impact, and making very quick business decisions. So if you address this challenge head on and bring these insights to your organization, you could potentially save your organization millions of dollars. As we highlighted here, something as simple as just alternate parts. One alternate part could save a business tens of millions of dollars. And that insight today in many organizations is tough to get across the data ecosystem. We're helping bring that together and make it much easier to navigate. Okay. Now, before we close, I do see there's another question. Is this a model on our website, and what is it called? Is it a knowledge kit? So what you've seen today is hot off the press. This is something that our team's been working very aggressively on to address the current concerns. This is not currently released as a knowledge kit. This is something that we are rapidly working to put in that scenario. But Andrew, if you have a business case that perhaps you would like to leverage this model for, I'd strongly suggest let's set up a follow-up discussion on that. And this is definitely something that we can use to accelerate those discussions. So we are working to get this into that scenario of a knowledge kit, but this is available for use. And as I mentioned, the HTS code and bringing that data in, we didn't want organizations to go through that trouble. So we've done a lot of that modeling and that work already. So you can take advantage of that work that our teams put into place. Okay, very good. So just pausing here. If there are not any more questions, I'll give it a moment here. Any final questions before we work to wrap? Okay, very good. So before we close, I do want to mention that we do have a winner identified for the $100 Amazon gift card. So thank you to Peter from Constellation Brands. So Jasmeet from Stardog, he's going to reach out to you and make sure that you get that gift card. So thank you for attending, Peter. Looking forward to connecting with you as well. And thank you all for attending today. I hope this was informative and you understand the power of what Stardog can bring to the table to address this ever-changing concern in the tariff and the supply chain ecosystem. If you have follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Myself, our sales executive team, our leadership team, we are very committed to this problem. We are seeing leading organizations leaning in heavily to address this using this capability and this technology, and we're ready to help in any way we can. So with that, thank you all for attending. Appreciate your time, and we will be reaching out with any follow-up questions and concerns that may come up. So thank you all.